This is SoundNotion, the weekly podcast for new music and music news. I'm Patrick Gulo.
I'm Sam Merciers.
I'm Dave McDonald.
And I'm Nate Blyton.
This week we're happy to feature Ken Ueno, who we tried to have on a couple months ago, but unfortunately we
SoundNotion
lost the audio.
13.
Hello,
SoundNotion
guys.
13.
Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, thanks so much for being back.
Yeah. So, Ken, we talked to you. We had a great episode a couple months ago, but we lost it all. But I'd like to do this piece again, your vocal concerto, which is called "On a Sufficient Condition for the Existence of Most Specific Hypothesis."
Yes.
Yeah. It's sort of strange that we're all in on the joke now, so because we've heard it, but I think it's worth you telling the story of where you came up with that.
As a vocal concerto that was written for myself, many of my pieces are written person-specifically, meaning the people I collaborate with, I try to analyze some of their specific extended techniques or skills, and not only that in terms of material, but something about the aura of their lives or something that makes them appealing as human beings and trying to honor that. And since this is a piece for myself, I thought one of the ways that our identities are projected in contemporary life is through the internet. And so, just as a ruse, I did a Google vanity search on my name, and I found that among some other interesting characters like a acrobatic pilot, I found this computer scientist in Japan, and he had written a paper with this title, so I just used the title. But thinking of a Borges story, Thon Ukbar Orbius Tertius, in which the short story is in the guise of a encyclopedia entry that describes life on another planet, and what happens is that as these scholars discover these tomes, they start influencing life here, and until all of the complete set of these tomes are discovered, it's influenced life so much here that it's hard to tell if it's describing life here or there. There's this kind of Mobius strip of identity, and that I was interested in, and it's kind of happened in the internet now that if you I think Googled this title, I think my piece comes up first.
So you just kind of like ruined this guy's life.
I mean, maybe he gets
a little
I don't
harsh.
know. I think he's a happy person. I don't know. He's not in a quandary. I mean, I hope he's gotten the CD, or if he contacted me, I could send it to him. Or he's a fan of new music. I found a Ken Ueno, who's another kind of scientist, and I found a website of this guy, and his hobby is rock and roll, and he has in Japan an Aerosmith cover band called Aerosmith.
Aerosmith.
Pretty cool, right? Yeah, I
Right.
thought maybe I would learn some of those songs and just show up one day.
It's me,
In his
guys.
cover.
Did you ever try to get in contact with the Ken Ueno who wrote the paper?
Huh? Sorry?
Did you ever try to get in contact with the Ken Ueno who wrote that paper?
I think I tried finding his email or something, but I didn't try too hard.
Right.
I can go back and do that. I guess I should.
No, I was just curious
I should send him
if you had
the score or
if he
something.
knew about
I
it.
don't know.
It'd just be a fun conversation.
Yeah, we
I
have the
think.
same name. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
That would be a long conversation, I think.
Yeah.
Hey, we have the same name. Crickets.
Yeah.
Hey,
hello.
you did a thing called On a Sufficient Condition song? I did a thing called
I
On a
did that too.
Yeah.
What a coincidence.
The thought, infinite monkeys, infinite time. Yeah. Turns out that other Ken Ueno and me, we've written the complete works of Shakespeare independently of each other.
Wow.
That's right.
Crazy. Yeah.
Much faster than a room full of monkeys.
Yeah. Hopefully. Yeah.
So, what you have any performances coming up that you'd like the audience to know about, Ken?
Okay, coming up, the thing I'm working on right now is a string quartet for the Del Sol String Quartet. They're based in San Francisco, and there's a festival out here in the spring called Other Minds.
Mm-hmm.
And my new string quartet is going to be featured on that festival in the spring, coming up in the spring. I also have a piece for the choir, Volti. They're pretty cool. They're based in San Francisco. I think they do exclusively new music, and so that's an exciting, to know that a choir group is, only doing new music.
That is pretty
exciting, right? Pretty
Yeah.
cool. Yes. So
Yeah,
those
absolutely.
Are
I think I could be wrong, but I think Chris Schultes, who we had on 2 weeks ago, is writing a piece for Del Sol for that same thing. I know he's working a piece for the Del Sol String Quartet.
Cool.
The violist went to New Mexico, where Chris Schultes was for years, so they know each other.
Okay. Oh, well, my piece is going to feature... Have you guys heard Chinnery Ung's piece for them, the Del Sols?
No.
No.
It's great. First of all, because it's Chinnery Ung, but also because it showcases what's also very special and person-specific, for the Del Sols. They can all sing and play at the same time.
Are you going to be
the violist... No, I'm not going to be singing in it, but the violist throat sings.
Wow.
Oh.
So that's going to, we're wacky craziness. It's going to, yeah. Flying out to San Francisco. Don't miss this.
Wow.
We'll take it up.
It's also going to have interactive video by this guy named Johnny Decam.
Wow.
You guys, video guy.
Cool.
He's currently on tour with Dream Theater.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ow.
So, Dream Theater. Not only do I have something in common with the other Ken Ueno. Dream Theater and I share the same video collaborator.
That's pretty brilliant.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's very cool. So
Yeah.
I have a question for you. You mentioned not only is the piece that we're going to talk about today a person-specific piece, and this other piece is person-specific.
Yes.
What in particular interests you about writing so specifically for an individual musician?
Well, as a composer, I think I mainly respond to myself as a listener, and I think you got to be a fan. At least what drives me to be a music maker is how much I love listening to music. And the main artist, the biggest inspiration I had in my life to first become a musician was Jimi Hendrix. And then after I got into Jimi Hendrix, I heard some contemporary music, 20th century, no longer contemporary, Bartok, Stravinsky, and then some contemporary music, and that's how I wanted to become a composer, by getting to know that music. But first and foremost, wanting to become an electric guitarist and a musician was Jimi Hendrix. And then I thought about things like the opening, the introduction to the Monterey Pop performance of Wild Thing, and it's just like feedback and just... He's reinventing the guitar. It's no longer tracking the fundamental as the main, the melody or the foreground. It's the stuff above it. It's the noise, the feedback, the spectrum of sound. It's frequency based, and so that's one influence that I still think about. A more complex spectrum of harmony. But then, right before he starts going into the song proper, he plays the open strings and he's out of tune, And then I thought, if this guy, Jimi Hendrix, were in the Naumburg, chamber, competition or something like that, and I'm judging this, he'd fail. The main, the normative means of assessing classical performance, right? And you apply that to this performance, it's. But on the other hand, I said, what makes this an iconic moment? It's so famous and it's so powerful, And I felt like, okay, in all of the listening of the blues, or our basic fandom listening, when we listen to our favorite musicians, especially in pop, see, I propose that we're engaging with some sort of communion with the aura of that artist, and in some way, for me, that kind of listening is not so dissimilar from when I pick up the phone. I can recognize it's my mom with her just saying hello, and beyond that, when she says hello, I can often tell what mood she's in. There's some very complex modes of listening going on, and that sense of the aura, something about that specific person that you're engaging with in that kind of dialogue as a listener, I'm investigating that in some way and trying to transcribe that as a compositional or curate that in compositions. And so I like to collaborate with people who, I admire as human beings, first and foremost, and then in some sort of way, I'm trying to honor and transcribe their essence that makes them remarkable human beings into the piece in some sort of way. That's the main attraction for me in writing person-specific music.
That's really interesting. So when you're working on a person-specific piece like that, how much of that works its way into the notation, or is it something that you do mostly through the communication directly? Or
notation is a kind of dialogue with the performer or performers, and depends on the so depending on the performer you're collaborating with, that dialogue has to be different. For some people, their training and their background, who they are as person-specific entities, is conservatory trained people who don't improvise, whatever. So we work together to try to figure out the notation that they can most appropriately give life to. And other times I work with improvisers, and it's through our mutual experience in collaborating together that we create a kind of history, a dialogue. So when we perform together, there's a kind of implicit score in our bodies or from past experience that you engage with, right? I might compare it to like when we have our most meaningful conversations with our best friends. There's often, given a period span, that you don't have such a wide range of topics, but the most meaningful conversations you're trying to discuss and amplify or investigate something within yourselves or each other, right? Something that's important. You're trying to, go through some changes in your life or something, and then you have another conversation a week later. You often pick up on those things until those things are resolved, or you amplify those things given what's going on in your lives, and so an improvisatory context with the people you trust most might be something like that, I think. So it ranges. And then there's like folk musicians or that I've performed with or written for, or traditional Japanese performers, in which I have to figure out different kinds of notation that they understand that is meaningful to me as a compositional kind of space. And if there's orchestra, then the orchestra has to be able to engage with it on the, and the conductor has to be able to make sense of it. There's multiple levels of dialogue. I think the notation itself, therefore, has to be kind of inflated. Now, I propose that, like, for example, when I work with multiphonics, I often have to send the specific multiphonic sound file.
Right.
And if you're a good performer, I want to privilege the sound. And if on your instrument that specific fingering doesn't work, then maybe you can find a solution that best approximates the sound rather than what sound comes from this fingering.
Yeah.
See? Yeah. So on those different levels, I think. Hey, I wrote a little article on the New York Times Opinionator that kind of discusses some of these things, about the score being in the body, or that you have to, depending on what compositional or music making context. Nowadays, since it's much broader than ever before, you have to use different kinds of means to communicate to the performers to make music.
Yeah, that sounds.
I remember reading that article and thinking that you're just saying these exact things, and it was really interesting, the approach to, looking at something like multiphonics and just like trying to figure out so many different solutions for so many different people, and that's research in itself, basically.
Yeah. Notation is kind of a, of course, some people's notation are so beautiful that it's an expression in themselves, like George Crumb, and some medieval neumes or whatever. It has a visual communication, which I think also maybe influences how you might perform it too. But for me, some things don't make sense notating in a or privileging the notation rather than verbal coaching or trusting that through performance together we can get certain kinds of results when we improvise together. Or I want to first and foremost privilege the sounds actually more than the notation, as important as the notation can be for some. I mean, that's a personal thing for me. I know that some people are much more invested in the way certain things look, and that can be an expression on itself, in of itself. But for me, I believe that sounds in and of themselves, certain sounds, have a communicative power. So, I want to get to that most efficiently, and that has to do with figuring out who the audience is, the performer, the dialogue. If I have this signifier, then how is that going to be interpreted by this person? I have to kind of think of that ahead of time and design a communicative mode of a notational system or recording or some sort of propagation that is most efficient and appropriate. Yeah. Do you guys know about the pharmacon?
No.
Socrates and Plato, and then later contemplated upon by Derrida. So Socrates never wrote anything, right? Because he believed that the writing itself influences how you think, and it's kind of he thought it was to man's detriment. But if it weren't for Plato, we wouldn't know anything that Socrates said. But one of the things that Socrates contemplates, Phaedrus, he talks about the invention of the system of writing in ancient Egypt. And it's the god of the underworld, Thoth, who invents writing, and he was presenting it to the king, and he says, I've invented something. It's writing, but it's a pharmacon. Now, the word pharmacon is very interesting because it's an ancient Greek word, embodies its opposite. Pharma, like as in pharmacy, right? It means medicine, but it also means, the same word means poison at the same time. So, they said, well, the system of writing is invented. It's a pharmacon because on one hand, it can extend human culture and memory. It can be an aid to memory, but because it exists, it can be, they foresaw that we would begin to depend upon it and therefore begin to diminish our internal capacities for memory. Sure. And it's a continual kind of tension, I think. It's hard to resolve. One is always better than the other, or it's a kind of cautionary tale about our relationship to technology. And then like when I think about my iPhone, I think my iPhone is a pharmacon. And once I started noticing that I started taking more notes on here, I think I started forgetting more stuff. So I went back to a notepad, just carrying it around for certain ideas. But on the other hand, this allows me to Twitter or other things and stay in communication or get different kinds of information. I can take video on here, and there's different things I can also facilitate in terms of memory because of that. But I think and classical music notation is a kind of pharmacon too. Because it was developed in a particular period of history that privileged melody and harmony, that certain things are, if you have a multiphonics in which multiple frequencies have different amplitudes, it's really cumbersome to notate. And also because its frequencies, it doesn't fit within the equal tempered scale. There's more graphics that's necessary there. And also it doesn't, if you have a very weird kind of performance practice, it doesn't take into consideration how those people might make that music. And that's the basic tension that many ethnomusicologists have when they go into different cultures and try to transcribe that music. I've seen early 20th century transcriptions of Western African music in which it's notated in classical notation.
In like 3-4 times.
Yeah, and it's the same piece, but every time they do another run time, it's going to look completely different,
Right.
And, and besides the fact that it attenuates the quantizes the frequencies as well as rhythms in ways
Right.
that it doesn't really isn't appropriate for their performance practice.
Right.
Yeah. This whole time, you started all the way back with Jimi Hendrix and how seeing that performance is not just hearing the note and the feedback and all that. You're experiencing Jimi Hendrix, pardon the pun. It's the Jimi Hendrix experience.
Absolutely, it's a very somatic, visceral thing, and there's some power of him as a persona that comes through. There's another article I recently wrote contemplating my experience hearing the best lecturer that I heard at Harvard, and it was B.B. King. And one thing that really impressed me and changed my life is that when he demonstrated what he does, how he does it. He had his band play. They were vamping on A, and he said, "I could play the right notes." And he played, fifth position A pentatonic, and it was the right notes. And he said, "I could play the same notes, but turn it on." And it was B.B. King. And he was so aware of how he was doing. It was amazing. He was just he was so in touch with how he's doing what he's doing. But of course, he's B.B. King. But then I thought, well, if I were to transcribe this music, it would look the same.
Yeah.
In terms of classical and a five line staves and that kind of notation. But
Right.
but that difference that he demonstrated, right, demonstrates the difference between B.B. King and other guitarists.
Well, I think what I always come to when I'm talking about like pop music, even pop music that I consider to be high art in its own way, is that if it's really pop music in that sense, it's dependent, at least in part, on the powerful personality of the performer. Like you can look at the sheet music for Strawberry Fields, and it doesn't really tell you anything about the way it sounds. You have to hear the Beatles do it to really get what it sounds like.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Paul McCartney, John Lennon, their specific sound.
It doesn't
their
have
aura
Liverpool
comes from
accent
listening,
written.
Right. I think though that the Beatles on one hand, especially the McCartney songs, they're so the melody and the harmony is so well put together in a classical sense,
Yes.
or a whole quarter kind of sense, that you can. And that's why I think there's so many more. There's so many Muzak versions of the Beatles.
Oh, yeah.
The tunes are so iconic, easily identifiable, and you can arrange it in almost any way, and it's just so robust as just like material on one hand. But on the other hand, like Rolling Stone songs are much more like rock-based, and their essence is qualitatively, it might be argued that it depends much more on the specific performance.
Yes.
I don't know. Well, so because the material is a little bit more generic on that sense. The transcribable material might be more generic in that sense, but the 5-string open tuning and Telecaster sound that Keith Richards has is instantly recognizable, and you just hear one note and one chord, and it's Honky Tonk Woman or something. That's really powerful. And of all the thousands of bands and like bars and cover bands I've heard playing Rolling Stones, that one chord, is not the authentic. And in this recent article, I also try to contemplate the relationship between mechanical reproduction, like recordings, and the authentic. And I feel like thousands of times I've heard the Rolling Stones prepared me to receive the authentic when I finally got to hear the Rolling Stones live. And it didn't kind of, whereas Walter Benjamin, argued that he wasn't specifically talking about recordings, but for film and photographs, that the aura is diminished, in the reproduction. But for recordings, you do begin to have a kind of personal relationship with some of your favorite artists, and it's that specific voice, their charisma, that the whole kind of package, and it becomes a kind of inconvenient, theoretical. It's inconvenient really to talk about because most of the time, and people like Rosa Botnick argue that in Western classical theory in the 20th century, it's much more structuralist. You know, you talk about the intervals, you talk about what pitches and how they're functioning much more than what's this magic in the voice, you know,
Exactly.
or the sound. That's really hard, you know. But on the other hand, I might presume that many more people in our society today engage with that kind of aura-based listening because they have their special artists and they prefer their versions of those covers or their songs for some sort of reason. That you create these relationships with your favorite people, and there's something about them as human beings that you begin to kind of listen to at the same time as listen to the song, right?
Right.
So as composers, then, would you say that it's so you encode a lot of this information in your score somehow? You mentioned that you give recordings and things like that. Do you think there's a danger of information overload when you're giving all of this information to the performer? And do you think that there's a point at which we as composers can back off and just trust the performer to make good decisions? Or do you think that it's good to just give them as much as possible?
Absolutely. So like my favorite collaborators who I improvise with, like Tim Feeney and Matt Ingalls and these people, we don't even have a score, you know, and it's a matter of trust. I think one of the most important factors for making good music is actually trust. You have to be able to trust the performer, but the amount of information that you begin that dialogue for a particular piece might be different based on who they are. So, like for example, like my viola concerto for Wendy Richmond. You know, that score is very fussy in terms of all the little details and whatever, because that's what I could trust her with, and I think that's, you know, part of her strength as a, you know, conservatory trained virtuoso. I really wanted to, and then it was an opportunity in that piece. I thought I wanted to really craft everything really minutely, and that was also appropriate for how the string orchestra fit in with that, you know. But my vocal concerto, there are some moments where the vocal line is very specifically written, but other times it's just like the fundamental, and I just write, you know, kume or something, you know, or here's a cadenza. I know how many phrases it's going to take, or I know what I'm going to do, but I want to be able to improvise at that moment, you know. And then I write in and I coordinate with the conductor that I'm going to give him a cue when I'm done, you know.
Right.
So it's thinking about the structure how to practicalize the structure, and I mean, good music also requires efficiency of communication, the dialogue between the composer and the performer, or, you know. So yes, we do, I think, have to figure out how much information is appropriate to give a certain, you know, performer, right? Have you guys listened to Mingus's album Oh Yeah?
Yes.
The CD version, at least the last track, is a 27-minute interview with Ahmet Erdogan, right? I believe you know, Erdogan is asking him about his notation system because he leaves a lot out, and he expects Roland Kirk and these people to inflect these lines differently every time, and he trusts them. He says, like, if I give you the, you know, the chord scale, the beginning point and the end point, you can go blah blah blah, blah or be, you know, if you fit it in, it's fine. And he wants you to do that, and he has Roland Kirk in his band because do certain things, you know, and he wants them to do certain things, right? And I, you know, imagined that Duke Ellington, you know, wrote certain ballads and you know, gave it to Johnny Hodges for, you know, he says he knows what Johnny Hodges is going to do with a ballad solo, right? I mean, you know, so once you know someone can do certain things and you want to even create a vehicle for them to be expressive of that, and then you think about, well, how can I get that performance out of them, right? You know, and for different people and different compositional contexts, the amount of notation and amount of the type of information might be different.
Right.
Yeah.
So should we move on to our stories?
Stories for today.
Stories. What's a story, Patrick?
Well, one of the big stories from this week was actually a couple concert halts. one at the BBC Proms, one at the Concertgebouw. I know this just because from at work, Gil Shaham was playing, or was about to play, and then these Palestinian protesters had come up to the and started waving flags and stuff at the Proms, and he could not play for a while until they escorted these people out of the building. So we're seeing a lot of like politically motivated protesting, even at classical concerts today, which is pretty interesting.
So this was actually at the Proms, and the BBC broadcast was halted. The Israel Philharmonic was performing with Gil Shaham, and the protesters appeared to be anti-Israel protesters. They were waving Palestinian flags in the hall. We have a little video. This is a video on YouTube that someone shot with their with I assume with their cell phone camera from the hall, from Royal Albert Hall. Okay, I just wanted to listen to the point where you hear the guy with the camera shout, "Go home," because I think it's adorable.
I think the world of classical music should be happy that they're considered important enough to warrant a political protest to happen during it.
That they're that relevant. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
This is an actual quote from Gil. "I'm used to getting heckled after I start playing. This time I didn't even play a note."
So yeah, they started heckling before the performance. They continued. There was continued ruckus at the beginning of the Bruch violin concerto. And I saw another video where you actually showed a little bit of him playing over the shouting, which was interesting.
Yeah.
This is the second politically controversial performance that Israel Philharmonic has been a part of in the last month or so. We talked about them at the Bayreuth Festival playing Wagner for the first time, which was an interesting cognitive dissonance for some people.
Right.
So do you guys think this is something that, I don't know, classical music is good at expressing? Or do you think there may be other ways to...
Well, it's just a place with a lot of people.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's kind of, it's the same as if someone went into, you know, a big, you know, pop music performance or you know, a museum and did a protest or something like that. This is just a place where there's a bunch of people and they're going to get their 15 seconds to say something.
It's probably a little easier to disrupt the orchestra concert than a pop music concert.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, from the perspective of I'm going to be able to get up and actually accomplish something where people are going to hear what I say and I'm not going to get, you know, drug out of there real fast. Probably there's a lot more security at, you know, a Britney Spears concert than there is at something like this.
Also, this was live broadcast, so the audience is pretty big.
Yeah.
And I believe the performance itself continued. The broadcast, though, was preempted.
Right.
So, and then the other concert protest issue, protest may not be the right word for this one, was at the Concertgebouw this weekend. The concert was about to start. It was to honor. So a lot of this just happened last night for us in the U.S., and it hasn't really been reported that much in the English press, though I'm sure it will be. It appeared to have been a concert for the 100-year celebration of some composers group in Holland, and the Dutch Queen was there. And so that's kind of the where this became an issue. a man came up and grabbed the microphone from seemingly the conductor, I guess, and started saying that he was sent by Allah to do something. We have another video here. There's the Queen in the Mahler box. Because where else do you put the Queen but in the Mahler box?
Spijt me.
Queen Beatrix.
In de naam van Allah, de barmhartige en genadevolle. Ik weet het, het spijt me. Dat is niet de manier zoals het moet. Maar ik ben genoodzaakt om dat te doen. Ik heb een aantal keer verzoeken gedaan, maar dat werd overgeslagen. Ik ben een
So you see, the guy has taken the microphone and is addressing the audience, and the string section is kind of surreptitiously trying to leave the stage. And apparently some people thought that this was part of the performance. Turned out not to be.
Yeah.
Well, somebody on Chloe Veltman's blog commented on her reporting on this. Said he saw it as a rather mild-mannered and well-turned-out chap mumbling into a microphone for a minute or more.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think the idea, like the people who did report on this, were just said it was like a big, scandal. Oh my God, this person got up there, and apparently it's just like this guy just, said a few words and got off the stage after.
Yeah, and the reason it was a big deal was for the security.
Right.
The head
What
of
was
state.
the crux of what he said?
I have no idea. As far as I know,
I'm
it's
sure it'll
not
be
translated
reported
anywhere
more
in English
soon.
yet.
Apparently he claimed to be sent by Allah, so
Yeah.
I don't know.
Hey, while we're at a lull here, Dave,
Wow.
your video is frozen in a Rorschach blot for the entire past 15 minutes.
Well, if that's okay,
Let's just continue. That doesn't really matter.
Okay.
yeah. If you guys don't mind,
there's
seeing-
some moments where rock concerts have also been disrupted, right? Like I remember there was a soy bomb dancer that came on stage during a Bob Dylan performance in the Grammys or something like that, right? And then there was a nude streaker in front of David Niven for like one of the Oscars, or I mean, there's some historical moments where,
yeah.
rock and also the Academy Awards and other moments have been hijacked, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
Which is strange that
But
these
it's
two things
strange 'cause
happen
this
so
is-
close to each other.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Could call it pulling a Kanye when you up and grab the microphone from somebody and start preaching what you want to preach.
That's what he
Oh,
should have
dang.
said. He should have said, "I'm gonna let you finish." But I was sent here by. I'm gonna let you finish, but I was sent here by Allah.
Beyonce had the best video ever.
Wow.
All right.
All right, let's look at this
Speaking
contemporary
of
classical guide.
Yeah. Speaking of classical music,
That's a
Sweet.
transition that could be used for any two stories on our show ever.
that is exactly right. Oh, I can't find her name now. What was her name? Oh, yeah.
And
Anne, yeah,
Anne
Anne
Majette.
Majette wrote a piece for the Washington Post in the lifestyle section. It's sort of a primer for appreciating classical music. And I found it at times a little bit I might not agree exactly with what she's saying, but overall, I think it's pretty thought-provoking and does a pretty good job of contextualizing a lot of newer pieces and the isms contained therein and who are the key players. If somebody wanted to know a little bit more about this, I think it wouldn't be a bad place to start. So she basically breaks the article down into multiple sections. The first being, why should I care about minimalism? And goes through an explanation of what minimalism is, and I think does a pretty good job of explaining it in a way that your average person can understand, that it's not just somebody repeating something over and over and over again, that there are more complex processes going on, and that's the thing that the form is made of, and that's one of the things people appreciate about it. I think she does a good job of explaining that in a way that a pretty intelligent non-specialist could get.
Do you think she does it in a way that might convince them to care about it?
I don't think so.
I know that's kind of a
tall order
stretch.
just for
Right.
some
I mean,
text.
it's a historical fact, minimalism now, in the way that
Right.
expressionism is. I find it when I go to really strange that when I go to a classical music concert and then there's like Alban Berg on it, from 1935, that people think, oh, it's dissonant and it's weird.
Right.
I mean, that's contemporary. What other art form, film, literature, anything else, something from 1935 is considered contemporary?
Right.
Yeah.
It's a historical fact,
I
I think minimalism now is a historical fact. Okay, but I mean, you got to find different ways to advocate for it. I mean, I think that also showcases the fact that maybe one, often within our specialized fields, in the field of new music, there are some people who polemicize, things like what used to be termed downtown music or minimalism or those kinds of, more American beat-based new music trajectories versus like uptown modernism, whatever, but it's all functionally avant-garde, together. All of new music. We think it's this far apart, but it's all over here on this little, because most people out there in America, don't know that we even exist, any of us.
Yeah, I mean, one of the most common tags I've seen in blogs or newspaper articles or people's book is to make a list of composers people should care about. I mean, that's been done so much. I don't know if that really, to what degree it really makes a qualitative difference.
Yeah.
Right.
I think it's incredible that Anne is getting emails from these people just asking her these questions.
Well, that's cool. I mean, they know enough that they're like, "What is this?" Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
But like these are like she said, I get these questions all the time. These are frequently asked questions just to her email. People, I like traditional orchestral music. Why can't they just go on writing that?
Does that mean that older people are getting more internet savvy and they can write emails?
Probably.
I don't know.
She makes a very strong statement. I wanted to hear what the panel thinks about this. She says that minimalism is by far the most important contribution the United States has made to new music.
That's
I'd say
interesting.
jazz, maybe.
Well, it
I
depends.
think
on
the electric guitar.
Yeah. I knew we would have some opinions based on that. I would say electric guitar is way up there as far as new sounds for the year,
Without the electric guitar, stadium rock wouldn't be possible, or rock and roll, and there's something about the guitar that was developed, electric guitar that was developed in coincidence over the 20th century with like recordings and how that democratized music and pop music and invited people like the Beatles to be able to listen to Buddy Holly and think about participating, in making music.
To me, probably inspired a lot of electronic music too, because the guitar was the perfect clean input device, where you can get a sound into a system, a signal into a system in a really clean way that has lots of physical manipulations that can change the sound.
Oh, and Les Paul also invented multi-tracking.
Right.
Yeah.
I was really impressed years ago before the Euro when I visited Belgium for the first time that I think it was the 10 franc note had Adolphe Sax with the face on it,
Nice.
And I thought, wow, that's really cool, an instrument inventor. And I thought, well, in the United States, who would that be? And I thought Les Paul.
Yeah.
He was still alive at that time, but I mean, much bigger. I'd say, he made so much more. Many more things possible and that transformed culture in the 20th century because of the electric guitar and multi-tracking.
You might also make the argument that the recording studio, as imagined by the Beatles and the Beach Boys, and a lot of other people thereafter,
as an instrument,
as a way to create a sonic thing instead of just a way to lay down tracks that represent this song. The recording studio is the instrument. We're going to go in there with our songs, and we're not going to just lay them down the way we know them or the way we play in a bar. We're going to make a piece in that recording studio.
Yeah.
Well,
go ahead.
One of the things I was also thinking about that with this article that we're talking about of Anne's, I always wondered if this, this tension that comes up when classical music, symphonic audiences have a question about what new music is. They're often rich people who want to have their Brahms, and they're going to the orchestra and I imagine it to be like some people going out on the night and they're going to a specific restaurant because they think they'll get their filet mignon, you know, and then they don't know that there's a David Chang there who's gonna make this weird kind of hybrid kind of barbecue. What I mean, or that they're gonna serve Chinese food that night or something, you know, that there's this thing that they think that they're not getting with their money. You know, it's like a consumerist kind of tension, isn't it? They think that they're paying good money to get this thing that's going to give them a kind of, you know, escapist fantasy or whatever, or a particular kind of enjoyment that they think that they're going in, they're paying for a particular kind of experience, and the new music thing that's, you know, saddled between two war horses is a little blip in that experience.
Right.
You know.
So I guess in that sense, there's just a disagreement about what the orchestra is and what it should be doing. You know, they're expecting, they think of the orchestra as one thing, but the orchestra thinks of itself as something different.
So sure. I mean, and if you go to El Bulli or, you know, one of these modernist cuisine places, you know, you're getting this weird contemporary kind of inventive thing that's not your, you know, normal filet mignon or something, you know. I think therefore is this mismatch of expectations that's going on as from a consumer's point of view, and therefore, it you know, that's where you have this tension. It's not working right now.
Right.
The thing that kind of bugged me about this article is at the end when she lists like must-have recordings or something like that. It's Boulez and Crumb are the first two that she comes up with. Like,
right.
And Zhevsky.
Well, Zhevsky's a little more recent, but even the piece that she mentions isn't particularly recent. Like, these are pretty old pieces.
Yes.
Is there a point at which these things are no longer considered new? I mean,
yeah, well,
something the art world,
that's the other mismatch, right? Because we think, as composers, those things are repertoire. It's a historical fact. Minimalism is a historical fact. Boulez and Crumb, they're, you know, historical facts, and they're not as new and, you know. But for classical music audiences, you know, they still think Alban Berg from 1935 is new.
Right.
So it's, you know, it's depending on which perspective you're looking at this more recent, relatively new history. And compared to Brahms, yeah, Boulez is, you know, you don't know how to, you know, listen to it if all you've ever done was listen to Brahms, you know.
I like performing a test with younger music students where I play Webern Opus 3, which is a set of songs written in 1910, I think, and ask them when they think it was written. And invariably we'll get, oh, it was written in, you know, 2000 or something, you know, and it's over 100 years ago, and it still has a very strange, alienating sound to these students, which maybe that means we're not doing a good enough job, and maybe we're focusing a little too much on one type of music in school. What do you think?
A little bit.
Well, when I listen to Gagaku, it's from like 800 years ago. I don't know if it's way further back in time or in the future. You know, it just...
Yeah.
And I listen to Gagaku quite a bit, but it just floats around in time. I don't, you know, that's part of the appeal of it. I think it's like atemporal.
Right.
So, I mean, a few weeks ago, I was seeing, I saw a couple performances of Shakespeare in the Park, which they do every summer here in New York City. And I kind of was equating it to going to a concert that was, you know, was only playing Mozart or something like that. But I really, really liked it. So I don't know, like, how to think about that as far as, you know, being an advocate for new music and stuff and new things. You know, I want to do that and be that person, but, you know, I still like older things too. And I feel like maybe we might give a different, you know, we might look at it differently for somebody who enjoys old theater or something like that than someone who enjoys old music.
Well, I mean, I think we all have, as people who listen to a lot of new music and certainly write a fair amount of it, we all have old, long-dead composers that we enjoy listening to as well. It's just that we don't listen to them exclusively. And I think that's the issue here. Is not that we still have people performing Brahms. It's that we have people that don't perform anything after Brahms.
Right.
Well, Rob Deemer wrote for New Music Box what I thought was a pretty good response or an addendum to this article. Since we're trying to educate the public about what to look for or appreciate or how to understand classical music, he suggests a different route wherein instead of suggesting composers, he says that we should be suggesting chamber ensembles. And his reasons are chamber ensembles are going to be playing more new music on average than an orchestra. And I would have to say that's got to be the truth. It's absolutely got to be the truth, because major orchestras, like Ken was saying, you have a warhorse, then this tiny blip of a new piece, and then another warhorse. That's not as common with chamber groups. So he suggests, if you're going to suggest music to people, suggest it through the chamber ensemble, and that way you're going to be finding more new composers and more new pieces. What do you guys think about that?
I think you probably get a lot more variety that way. I think that's a good thing.
I think the best thing about Rob's answer is that it continues the dialogue.
Right.
Right.
And the more ways, more people, all the composers are coming up with different things that you can all suggest. I mean, in the end, to get that new listener, you have to figure out what works for that person, and then we all come into listening to different kinds of pieces and different composers and new music. It's so varied that we got to give them as many different nodes to interact with that might have more of a chance for that person to grab hold into. I think so. There is no one solution, right? I mean, everybody. I mean, even amongst us, we might think Boulez is blah blah, but it might for somebody else. Some composers I know, Boulez is one of the most important experiences in their lives, and so forth. So, we got to find different things that again. I like using the eating analogy. Like we all have different varied tastes, and eating culture is so much more varied now than ever before.
Yes.
And it's understood that you can go to one kind of restaurant and another. I mean, and that going to a taco stand does not make you any less of a eater than only going to Chez Panisse or something. Right? Like if you watch Anthony Bourdain, he's out in Mexico City eating a taco or eating street food in Thailand, but then he's also one of the esteemed French chefs in the country, right?
He likes his expensive French cuisine also.
Yeah,
And food.
I went to his restaurant a few weeks ago. It was nice.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, but so that's a little bit different than the concert setting, though, because you have to pick and choose a concert carefully, and then you have to be satisfied with all of the pieces on the concert. Like at least on a menu, you can pick whatever you want from the meal. Correct?
Well,
Yeah, well, it also depends. Like if you go to, Momofuku Ko or some other places where they have a prefix thing, or like a modernist cuisine place where there's 11 or 9 courses that is different every night, you have to kind of give yourself to the chef, and then so it's another matter of trust, right? If you gotta trust the chef or trust the ensemble, trust the orchestra, and maybe it's that relationship where people are more apt to trust the chef now than the new music presenter.
Right. Yeah. I'd like to say that I don't think anyone's surprised, Ken, that you were using food as a metaphor, because we all follow you on Twitter.
Oh, that's all I do is eat.
We always see
Every
like
day, right?
really delicious looking tacos seem to be the number one fare.
It really highlights the material and present. I think a taco is one of the most perfect foods, because as compared to a burrito, where there's so much packed into it, it's the taco, everything's so well balanced.
yeah.
There you go. Just like a good.
Yeah.
There's an
I think so.
economy of materials there that I think we as composers can value.
Oh, absolutely.
Lends itself to greater clarity, I think.
No.
So, what do you say we skip the Spotify article into the Rob Deemer article?
Okay. Well, here I'll sum up the Spotify article. Classical music is on Spotify. You've got to be smart enough to type in more than one piece of information to find what you want.
I actually do want to talk about Spotify, but let's save it for next week.
Right. In other words, you got to know how search works at least a little bit to find the classical music on Spotify you want. There.
Okay. I don't think that's what all of that was, but okay.
And if you don't know, email Sam and he'll tell you.
So another we just talked about an interesting response that Rob Deemer had to the Anne Majet article earlier. He also, Rob wrote a really great article on New Music Box this week called "Are You Successful?" Wondering at what point we can, or how we evaluate our success in our careers. Mm-hmm. And it's something that he's been dealing with as he's been interviewing a number of composers around the country and I guess around the world for his upcoming book project. And it's something that all of them, I'm sure, would answer a little bit differently, but it's something that we who do the show every week are concerned with as well, because we're all relatively young composers, relatively recently out of school, or still in school. How do you guys define success? Like, what is it that you would want to have, and when you got there, would call it successful?
That's a tough question.
You got to be dead for 200 years, and your music is easily retrievable on Spotify.
That's it. Well, a professor that we all know said that the components for being the famous composer. You have to be dead, and you have to have a loyal following that survives you, that to help start promoting your name after you're gone. He says that those are the two things that make you famous.
So that's not really the thing that this article is talking about. This article is talking about personal career success.
How can you feel satisfied with how your career is going?
Ken is part of the classical music Twitterati, I'd say. So you'll have a fan base that follows him for a long time.
You know, I've been to Vienna and I visited 2 of Beethoven's apartments, and in Salzburg I visited the Mozart birth house and his apartment, and you know what they had were little clippings of their hair.
Yeah, that's nasty.
I don't know. Is that success? I mean, how many more? Right? I mean, Beethoven and Mozart are successful.
Yeah,
in that sense. But you know, how do you measure success? I mean, there's the historical kind of success, or you know, success meaning that you're happy doing what you're doing.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Enough money to get by, and to me, it would be in a position where I'm able to collaborate with people that I respect. To me, like the collaboration, having people around with whom I can do projects, would be better than making a lot of money, but all I'm doing is writing by myself in my own little cave all the time. For me, my satisfaction, personal satisfaction, comes far more from collaborative projects.
I think it's a smart thing he said when in this article, when Rob said how a composer views success at this point can be strongly affected by their own interpretation of the expectations of others. So, like knowing what your audience is looking for, knowing what people in general want to hear, or what exactly what they think a composer is. Like when they hear the word composer, what does that mean to them? And if they're that, then they're successful.
I don't know what that.
I don't know. What about the freedom to do whatever music you want to do? You know, and if that doesn't fit into what your audience or perceived audience's image of what music should be or what a composer should do, I don't know.
I'm not saying I feel that way about.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that people, like the general audience of people who think, you know, this is, I'm looking at a successful composer right now. They're going to probably equate that to an older composer. You know, we might think of like a Beethoven or someone who's extremely prolific, someone who's getting big orchestra commissions all the time, that kind of stuff. That's a composer, you know, quote unquote. Not
So
that I feel.
Yeah.
So you're saying that success is based on, like, popularity,
Notoriety.
To a certain extent. I mean, in the public sphere, yeah. I mean, look, for me, I don't care, but I think that's the public perception of a successful composer.
Well, what about the people who have the respect of their peers? Sometimes the people who are the most successful in terms of commissions are not the people who other composers look up to, And I think maybe for me, my favorite composers are the ones who've taught me new ways to hear. Beethoven did that, Stravinsky did that. And for me, people like Helmut Lachenmann, and Gerard Grisey, as well as Duke Ellington and Jimi Hendrix, all have taught me new ways to hear. And Jimi Hendrix was also happened to be a rock star and very successful on that more kind of commercial level. But I think he is up there for me in terms of artistic success, as much as someone like Cage, Feldman, and Lachenmann. For me, there's in the end we have to figure out what our own values are about who we want to be, and stick to it. And right, I mean, if the word success comes in, what does that mean?
It means two completely different things. One for people who listen to classical music, and one for people who are classical artists or composers or performers,
or a public perception of that person versus the internal perception or desires about wanting to be a certain. We all think when we write a piece of music, we're projecting into the future, right? And in part of that, writing a piece of music is also projecting who we want to be, isn't it? And there are certain values about what we're trying to discover about ourselves, and also molding ourselves into the future.
Yeah,
and
it's different from person to person.
Doesn't this touch a little bit on the piece that we're going to be listening to soon, as far as?
In a literal sense, as well as I don't know, metaphorical sense too. Absolutely. Is it time to talk about the piece now?
Yeah, I think probably we should.
Perfect.
Getting a little long.
Okay.
So
well, in my case, I mean, there are multiple identities. I think every time a composer, or at least I think of it in my work, that when I ever compose or make music, that investigating my identity, who I am, who I want to be, what sound, and deliver that through sound. For a long time, I had this kind of double life as a vocal improviser, specializing in extended techniques, as well as a composer who wrote specific notes for orchestra or chamber ensembles, And I was given this opportunity to investigate these two come together, and writing for myself as a vocal soloist with orchestra. And there are two ways in which this piece projects backwards as well as forwards in time. The beginning of the piece starts out with a recording of myself when I was 6. See, I discovered this cassette tape that I made when I was 6, when I like to say my best friend was a tape recorder. I used to go around recording things like my mom yelling at my brother, as well as making musique concrète, non-linear musique concrète. And one of the sounds that I liked to record was my own voice. And it turned out, listening back, that I was singing multiphonics. So at the beginning of my piece, I start out with a kind of curated version of those sounds, over which I sing live. And I like to say that therefore creates counterpoint with myself, decades apart. And do you guys know Samuel Beckett's Krapp's Last Tape? It's like a monologue that is a multi-log dialogue. It's one character on stage, but he has a tape recorder and he's talking to himself. He listens to himself, and he has a library of recordings from different paths, a week ago, 10 years ago, whatever, and so it creates dialogue with himself. But also in that case, keeps having the same conversation, actually. So it's also complicated that it's also a monad, But since I discovered myself making some of the sounds that
I like to sing now, like multiphonics. When I was a kid, I wanted to have that, and so therefore, kind of projecting into the past. I feel like when I'm singing some things that refer to my recording, I'm making a recap not only to that moment in the beginning of the piece in which that recording happens, but I'm also making a recap to that moment when I was 6 and singing, because my life, our lives exist in time, and therefore not so dissimilar from a piece of music that unfolds in time, and looking forward into the future, since it's a piece written for myself, I felt like maybe the structure of the piece should also continue to unfold and change as my body changes, as I get older. And so my idea is that every 30 years, I want to recompose the opening tape part with sounds I'm making now, the sounds I made before, and then sing on top of it live. So in 30 years from now, I want to have the opening reconstituted with sounds I'm making now, with sounds I made before, and then sing on top of it live. And I like to say that my greatest musical ambition, and what I might deem as ultimate success, is to be able to do this at least 2 more times. So being 90 and being able to sing.
Well, I think modern medicine is on your side.
I hope so. So that also means that there's a kind of vector that goes into the future with this piece, which I was inspired by a Shinto temple at Ise, which is rebuilt every 20 years, as a kind of different way of thinking about materiality, right? Because often I think that a piece by Beethoven's fixed, or we found this original, but it's this frozen thing in time, right? Rather than this thing that keeps changing. Our lives keep changing, and everything else is actually in decay and changes as well. The world around us. Often when we look at a building, it seems much more permanent than us because it decays much slower than the rate of decay of our bodies, our lives. But it too will also change and need to be refurbished and whatever. All things in nature actually do. There's, in some respects, when we go to a museum or even a classical music concert, that there's a veneer of fixity, that it's kind of frozen in time, and that's it floats above all of these these realities of change.
Can we listen to that clip of you as a young kid at the beginning?
The opening part.
Yeah, we've got a clip from the beginning, and then a clip from a little bit later where it's grown-up Ken Ueno, and you can hear the orchestra a little more.
Then we jump forward into the future, further into the piece.
So that was clips from Ken Ueno's vocal concerto, which you can find a link to on the show notes to this episode. So thank you very much for sharing that with us, Ken.
Thanks for listening.
I think the whole approach to that piece is really a brilliant effort at trying to, in a real way, attach some identity to a piece in a way that's not really common in classical music. So that's why I appreciate it. And I can't wait to hear the subsequent performances, Should I Live So Long.
Let's all be there. I hope so.
Yeah.
You guys
We'll
are
do
invited,
SoundNotion.
okay? At least 60 years from now.
We'll be on SoundNotion 780.
Yeah.
There's
there's
a pact right now.
there's a sign of success
Okay,
for this
you know, it's
podcast.
just quit your beer drinking and
Yeah. who is it?
start working out.
Who are the performers in that recording we were just listening to?
That's the Bossa Modern Orchestra project, and we recorded it on Bebop Sound, their record label. So this is available on a CD released by them, available on iTunes as well as through their website, and also places like Amazon and so forth. Yeah,
Spotify?
Wherever finer CDs are.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Look, that's Spotify yet. But
Yeah, wherever finer downloads are available.
all right.
So I'm curious. We talked earlier about these performer specific pieces, and obviously this is a very specific piece for you.
Yes.
Is this something that you can ever imagine another performer singing?
Yeah, maybe I can imagine it. I remember one of my favorite concerts I saw was a dual billing of Jeff Beck and Stevie Ray Vaughan. They each played a half, and then at the end they came on and played together. And Stevie Ray Vaughan, they're both my heroes. And Stevie Ray Vaughan, the end of his set was Voodoo Child. And that was really interesting because most other people I've heard, and also myself trying to play it, are so overpowered by the sound of Jimi Hendrix, right? I mean, it's just, you play that song and the Ur text is just so, and the original reference is so powerful. But what Stevie Ray Vaughan did was on one hand a kind of almost note for note kind of homage that he showcased, that virtuosically embodied, studied, digested that piece, but at the same time it was a kind of transcending that reference and claiming himself. And so it also showed maybe that through Jimi Hendrix he was also to kind of able to discover himself,
Right.
you know, as this powerful individual artist on his own right, you know. So I hope, I mean, that's a pretty high standard, and I kind of, you know, shy from compare my hopes to that level. But I hope, I mean, you know, I could totally imagine somebody else being able to make a lot of these same sounds, as well as being able to even make more different kinds of sounds. But hopefully it's done with some sort of, I don't know, respect and understanding, empathy, and not just being able to match the materials, you know. Right. And I hope that learning the piece, doing the piece, also becomes a vehicle for that person to claim their identity.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like maybe some other performer would have a similar kind of thing that they could do with their own timeline of maybe providing a different tape part that
Sure.
link-
Or I can imagine any number of ways in which people can maybe hopefully engage with a piece in ways that are very personal to them.
Mhm.
So how would you feel about someone taking it upon themselves to perform the piece without notifying you? Or, well, I guess they'd have to notify you because you're the only one with probably the music.
Well, yeah, they,
That'd be an elaborate transcription
well,
project.
yeah, I mean, most of my music is hard enough that people can't just, find and then do it. That,
Mhm.
that I usually know the people who are doing my music. So it gives an opportunity to kind of coach, performance practice, whatever. I mean, and I imagine most definitely with this piece, people would have to be in much closer communication with me, to be able to know what it's about and how to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems to me it's one of those pieces where the performance practice has to be something that's transmitted from the composer. To me, music is kind of there is music that relies on what we consider standard performance practice, where all the unanswered questions you assume are going to be answered by the common practice of performance technique, and this is not the case. I mean, it's common in experimental music. They'll basically invent their own performance practice and write out how it works, and you're supposed to study that. And this piece, I think, might even be a little more too complex for even doing it that way. I don't know if it would be possible to do it without being coached.
Yeah, I imagine it'll be very difficult, more difficult than certainly other pieces that are more transportable. But I think listening to the sounds, I learned how to do some of these, sounds by being inspired by people I heard, tuba and overtone singers, or, certain vocal improvisers like Sainko, Diamanda Galas, Mike Patton, other people whose voices and their experimentation with their voices I really admire, and the sounds I think become a kind of ostensible score and a coaching space. If you just hear certain sounds and you think you can do it, you can just figure out your own way of being able to approximate the sounds much more than, it might be, for me, more helpful than looking at some notation, that graphic that's supposed to teach you how to do it. But the sounds themselves actually, teach. I mean, we learn to speak that way, right? As kids. And then the language is very complicated,
Yeah, I'm a big fan of using any and all means necessary to get what I want accurately portrayed on stage. And, like you've talked about, sending actual audio files or whatever, this is how it goes. So there's no arguing, there's no arguing between the interpretation of the page and what you actually want.
Yeah, and sometimes a recording, is much more efficient. For example, like as a guitarist, if I hear a recording of Eric Clapton on a particular tone, I think I can figure out exactly how his guitar was set up. Which guitar he's using. He's actually using the front pickup. He's got the tone rolled off, and it's like a Marshall, and it's about 50% treble and rather than writing all of those dials on the score, which when you go to the concert hall, the speakers are a different kind of cone or whatever, and the guitar's not really a Les Paul or whatever. You get a different timbre. But if you have the sound, you might be able to approximate that with the other means rather than just setting the dials in a particular kind of way, right?
Right, absolutely. But I think you sometimes encounter, old-fashioned thinking, I guess, where people want to preach the score, the power of the score, and everything should be in that score, the actual printed paper part, and something like, performance instructions that take a form other than just printed word, some people poo-poo on, which I think is ridiculous.
Well, it's also an issue of rehearsal time, too.
Yeah.
I wonder if this prestige that the printed score has, historically now, is in part due to some sort of Judeo-Christian aesthetic about the privileging the written word as being holy. And because in other cultures where music isn't as notated,
right?
They have a different relationship to music and music making.
Absolutely.
So there again, there's a pharmacon. There's the advantage that certain training and notational transmission of musical intentionalities facilitates, but then there's this other kind of baggage maybe that it also potentially might or might not transmit as well. So we just have to figure out what's in our dialogue with the performers, what's appropriate.
Right.
For
and in those cultures, I would say music is probably more participatory.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Than our current division that we have in the West between audience and performer.
Yeah, to me, that's the main value of a score is when, I mean, that's a way to convey the music when you can't just, like, have somebody somebody who did the composition and somebody who's going to perform it, like, they could just interact, like, dictate, talk about what you want to do, and then maybe the notes, the choice of the notes might not even be the key thing.
I think the things becoming more that way, even in classical music, open up the world of being a composer to more people, because some people are more skilled at what I consider sort of like programming. You know, writing notes on a piece of paper to me is very equatable to programming, because you've got an input thing where you're writing all this stuff down and you put it in something, the orchestra, and you get output. So it's like a programming language. Some people don't operate that way. I know some of the best musicians I've ever collaborated with in my life aren't that kind of composer at all, but I think they compose fantastic music. And it's all done with a 4-track and their guitar or whatever, you know. So it's just a different method. I think we could benefit, as Ken is doing, from getting a little more of that in our life in the art music scene.
Yeah, this is
I mean, all of this
maybe something of a
can
hybrid.
be in counterpoint as we want to make music in more manifold ways.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's all
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we should have another show dedicated specifically to what all that means for music education.
Cool, man.
Yeah, let's start another show about music education.
That's not a bad idea. Jinx.
I think we should probably wrap up. We're going a
Yep.
little long, but that's okay because we had an interesting guest. Thank you so much for joining us, Ken.
Hey, thanks so much.
We had a great time talking to you, and
Great talking to you.
we appreciate you getting up early, and also not only getting up early, but doing it twice after we failed back in March or April whenever we tried to do this before. So thank you very much. It was a lot of fun.
No problem. I had a lot of fun talking to you guys, and thanks for listening, and hope to talk to you guys again soon. Thanks.
All right.
Thanks a
Thank
lot,
you.
Ken.
So that will do it for this week's SoundNotion. To read more about any of the stories that we talked about today, to see any of the videos that I dropped into the video, in case you missed them if you're listening to the audio version of our show, you can find those links on our site, which is soundnotion.tv/SN. You can also go there to leave us a note if you have a comment on any of the stories, or if you have any questions, or if you want to share your opinion on any of the things. We certainly had the opportunity to share all of ours. You can also connect with us on Facebook and Twitter. We're at SoundNotion. I also highly encourage you to follow Ken on Twitter. Ken, what's your Twitter username again? DJ Modern?
DJ Modern with an E. Yeah.
With an E, yes. So definitely check that out. It's very entertaining. This show and all our shows on SoundNotion.tv are available in the iTunes store or wherever fine podcasts are available. Please subscribe so you can catch every episode. SoundNotion's introduction includes music by our own Patrick Gulo and video by Tyler Lepp. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you back next week.